Hello guys, in this video we will see what is the difference between a container and a virtual machine. A virtual machine provides us with a virtual computer system which has its own CPU, memory, network interface, storage, etc. created on the physical system. The software called as a hypervisor separates the machine resources from the hardware and provisions them appropriately so that they can be used by the VM. Let us look at the architecture. This is how a virtualized machine environments look like. There is a hypervisor. This hypervisor communicates with the infrastructure and provisions the infrastructure resources appropriately to the virtual machine. Now, each virtual machine can have its own operating system, its own networking, storage, etc. Now, let us look at what is a container. The container is the running instance of a Docker image. Docker images are supplied to the Docker engine, and Docker engine creates the Docker containers from the Docker images. The Docker containers are isolated packages, or they're the isolated applications. So each container is isolated from every other container. This is how a containerized application looks like. This application A, B, C, D, E, F, these all are the containers. Each container represents a single application. These containers communicate through the Docker engine. This Docker is also called as Docker engine. The Docker engine communicates with the host operating system, and the host operating system works the way it has to work. So one point or one distinction that we could see right now is that Docker containers do not have their own host operating system. Instead, they share the operating system. This is a major difference. Each virtual machine has a operating system, whereas each container does not have an operating system. They use the host operating system. Now let us look at the similarities. They both need a host to run. So without a physical system, you cannot have a virtual machine and you cannot have a Docker containers. They both provide us with an isolated environment. In both the VM and a container, we can have our own operating systems, file systems, networking, etc. Now let us look at some of the differences between the virtual machine and the Docker. The virtual machines are larger in size. They are larger because each virtual machine contains the operating system, and the containers are smaller in size because the containers do not have the own operating system. Instead, they share the host operating system, and this is what makes the Docker containers very popular because they are very lightweight and they are faster to boot. The virtual machine images are bigger, they are in GBs, whereas Docker images they are smaller in MBs. The reason is each virtual machine image needs to have the operating system, whereas Docker images they only contain the application specific data. Virtual machines are slower because each virtual machine needs to boot the OS, and when you boot the OS, all the startup scripts and the applications that you define at the startup are started. Whereas with the containers, you don't have an operating system first of all, and the second, the it shares the host operating system, so it is very much faster in terms of the boot time also. The hypervisor provides the hardware virtualization for the virtual machine. We saw that the hypervisor provisions the system infrastructure resources and provisions them to the each virtual machine, whereas with the Docker engine was communicating with the Docker engine communicates with the host operating system. So we can say that Docker it provides the OS virtualization, whereas hypervisor provides the hardware virtualization, because Docker does not communicate with the hardware. It communicates with the operating system, and operating system in turns communicate with the hardware. The other thing that is very much important is that when you put a VM idle, that is you do not run any application inside the VM, at that time also your infrastructure or your hardware resources are being used, that means RAM, CPU, etc. Whereas with the Docker containers, if you do not use any application inside the container, they don't consume anything. The other important thing is each OS needs to have a license. So if you have three virtual machines, you would need three licenses, and you have to manage those licenses. So it's a costlier. Whereas with the Docker, you only need the license for the host operating system. This is also called as OS tax versus single OS tax, because in Docker you only pay the license for the host operating system, whereas for the VM you pay tax for every OS that you use. And that is it. These are the differences and the similarities between container and virtual machine. If you have any more doubts, write it down in the comment section and I will respond to you as soon as possible. Thank you and have a nice day.